So as Ian just mentioned, this is just going to be a quick run through of some of the features that are in Surpass that can really help to aid collaboration within the authoring process. And hopefully you should see some of the features kind of pick up on the ideas that Lynn was just talking about there as well. So many of the organisations that we work with have large numbers of authors and editors and publishers that all work together. And it's not always possible to get those people in one room. So we try and put the features within Surpass to enable them to do that remotely. And Surpass is really designed to support this work environment, but not only with collaborative features, but to also mean that very minimal training is required. So if you have got lots of authors, you don't want to have to spend masses of time training them to use a complex system. So Surpass item authoring is really designed with intuitiveness at its heart. So we'll discuss just a few things. I'll start off by talking about the general work environment and some of the organisational features that sit within that, which just means that it's easier to manage large numbers of item authors and reviewers in one space. We'll talk a little bit about the media library for reference materials and any other media items that you might be using on your questions. The use of item workflow. Commenting for authors, reviewers, publishers, all the people that are going to be working with your items. And then finally, exporting items for group review, because we know that sometimes that remote access just doesn't always work. Sometimes you need everyone in that same room discussing the items that have been created. Okay, so the working environment. Access to Surpass is provided on the subject or item bank level. You can see that on the left-hand side of the screen. Those are all the subjects that have been created. So if you've got a particular author that's a subject matter expert for one subject area, you can give them access to that bank. Within that, this may seem a little modest, but there are lots of folders and subfolders that you can put within your bank. And that really does mean that you're saving time and that your authors know exactly where to head when they're within their item bank. Each subject has a media library. This is a shared repository for items, for media that might be used within items. So if you've got a particular image that is used on a number of the items within your bank, that can be put in this repository. All of your authors have access to it, and it just means that you're not going to worry about the version that they're using. It's all in one central location for them. To help manage an environment where there's lots of users in one space, each item goes through an established workflow. So, for example, if you have a subject matter expert, they're responsible for writing a particular item. They might be given access to the subject at a draft status. That means they'll be able to create items, but they're not quite allowed to publish it through to live. We're not giving them that level of responsibility. So what they see is limited down. They'll be able to create that item, set it from draft to review, and then the reviewers that you allow into your item bank will be able to move on and look at those items in that particular workflow status. To manage the communication between all of the users that have access, maybe they do have these different workflow roles, there are lots of comments that you could add in. So you can see a little example of a communication that's going on between some authors and reviewers within a particular item. This both allows them to say what changes they might have made to an item, but also perhaps to provide that feedback that is relevant to the writer for their next steps. And they can either choose to leave these as a public comment. So if it's a writer, they probably want to make sure that everybody that's going to review that item after them has access to the comment that they've added there. But depending on permissions, they might want to add in a private comment. This is more for your reviewers, your slightly more senior people. So if they want to say something that's a little bit insulting to the writers, they might want to make sure they don't have access to that. I'm sure there are more sensible uses. But again, this is all permissions-based, so you can really limit what your item writers can do, or you can widen their access, depending on what role they have within your organization. And then with each save of the item, you can fully monitor any changes that have happened. So those comments get logged in the item history, but not only that, you can see who's done the changes, what time, were there any workflow changes that have happened there, any tags that have been added. It's a good overview of the history of the item. And in the future, this functionality is going to be expanded further into a versioning tool. I know Jamie mentioned this morning, but it will mean that the people that are working within item authoring will be able to check the different versions that an item has gone through and compare the changes side by side. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, we know that not everyone can just review that item on their screen on their own and just say, yep, that's fine. Sometimes you do need that panel review. We now have the functionality to export items to a Word document, because sometimes peering around a screen when there's 20 of you in a room isn't that feasible. So people with relevant permissions can export items with the question text, the answer options, of course, but also lots of other details as well, such as metadata, citations that might have been added. All the relevant details to the item can be exported to a Word document for those panel review sessions. Okay, so thank you. So that really has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour. If you want to learn more about the context of those features and understand how to use them for yourself, there's a training session run by the training team tomorrow. You might want to have a go at that. If you're more interested in the future developments, head to the roadmap session. That'll be really useful. Okay, thanks. I think we're going on to questions now.